right, hi, good morning, good afternoon, something. Anybody? Let's start with a chant. Equifax sucks. All right, this session, I really want this to be interactive. It's going to be geeky, and the premise of it is the internet's broken. We all know it. Shit's broken, and something's got to be done. So for 17 years, I've been working on a crazy idea of how to fix the internet. And yeah, I know. It's whatever. I know. Your job is to call us out on our bullshit.
You mean shut it down? Fix like a puppy that you fix?
The anal plugs are out there. So, in the process of all this, there was a lot of math involved, and my math I forgot because that was 50-some years ago. So I met this gentleman, Mark Carney, in Paris, and we were having one beer, I guess it was. Only one beer in Paris.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And I said, I got this idea, and he goes, I'm a math bitch.
Not quite how that happened, but we'll let it go.
It was close. Actually, I said, you're my math bitch, is what I said.
Yeah, that's actually true.
And we started working this, and he goes, oh shit, this might actually be interesting. And so what we're going to go through is how do we fix, we know security's broken, and we're going to kind of go through some of the thinking that I've gone through. Please interrupt, please shout it out, and I'm going to hand things over to Mark and back and forth because he's taking the work that we've been working on and kind of really formalizing it, which will be coming out in the book with all the math shit that none of us will understand. So, measuring security, the fundamental thing that we have to start doing in our field is we don't know how to hold vendors. Any vendors in the room? Anybody willing to admit they're a vendor? Oh boy, okay, you guys. Your shit sucks. What we're doing is we let users figure out how well their performance is at home, but yeah, we still can't measure security. We're trying to fix security. But how do you fix something if you can't even measure it? So part of the first step of this is looking at how do you measure security in such a way that you're able to then construct an architecture that will actually work or potentially work. And I'm trying to be very careful here with my wording, saying we've solved everything versus we think we got a pretty good idea on how to go about doing this. So one of the biggest problems that we've got is we're dealing in absolutes. Everybody says that the CISOs or the board say, hey, are we secure? What the fuck does that mean? No, we're not secure. We're never going to be. What we do is we're dealing with absolutism. And we need to kill it. Because absolutism, there is no binary function in security, even though we've been relying on the end one.
Is there humans or is there not humans?
No, that's not true, because I'm a cyborg, so fuck you.
Someone called burn unit.
You're going to give me your phone again, right? So, first step was, let's get rid of zeros, let's get rid of ones, and let's look at everything in the middle, and everything in the middle is called analog. And I grew up an analog engineer, audio and video back in the 60s and 70s, and so I speak analog, and suddenly different sorts of answers began appearing when we started looking and introducing different concepts that are analog concepts. Right now, firewalls on, off, IDS, yes, no. We're dealing with these absolutes and trying to construct an answer. However, one of the biggest problems we've had in the whole IT industry since the 50s is we've been trying to get human beings to behave and think like computers. Except these are really shitty computers. These are the greatest averaging engines in the universe. However, they are really shitty digital systems. And we need to start thinking about things a little bit differently. So, fundamental issue was about a book that I wrote almost 20 years ago. A couple of you may have read it, Time-Based Security. And basically it said, in order to be secure, and I'm going to put that in quotes, of course, you have to have two conditions. You have to know how long it takes your black box detection system, whatever your black box detected. How long does it take to detect it? then how long does it take to react to it, and what do you include in the reaction? Do you include mitigation? Do you include the human? What do you include in that process? If you know for an absolute fact that your vendor will guarantee in writing, all vendors stand up with their written guarantees, please, that their product, thanks for the finger, dude, that their product will withstand any attack in the world for the amount of time it takes to detect and react to some anomaly in the system, that's the only time that you can actually say you're secure. Everything else is a wild-ass guess. So that was the fundamental premise that came out, believe it or not, of a bar napkin in Warsaw, Poland in 1995. So it has worked, but everything we're dealing with in security, we have omitted one critical metric: time. Everything we live with is about time. When we wonder about what is the purpose of the brain, and for those of you who have been studying neuroscience, the brain only has one function: remember the past in order to be able to predict the future, and the present is Planck's time, 10 to the minus 42nd. That's it. That's what we do. However, with computers, and we're trying to interface with them, social engineering, all the other bullshit, we're trying to do it with this digital format. Doesn't work. We know this shit doesn't work, but vendor out there, your next generation shit will fix it, right? Next Gen 5, come on, next gen is going to fix everything. So that was the fundamental. The second thing that started really looking is control systems. I grew up in an analog world. I grew up as an EE, electrical engineer. In order to make anything in the real world work and have some degree of stability, you have to have feedback. There is no alternative. Do we ever use feedback in our control systems in security today? No, we don't, and the vendor here is getting ready to shit himself. Well, yeah, so is your buddy there. And
I would disagree with that comment. I would say that the human is actually the person who regulates the future.
that depends upon the architecture, and we will get there. From a pure technology standpoint, this is accurate. We're going to get into that because there are some of the things that we have to do. But we have the mechanical balls to the wall system, we've got the acoustic systems, we've got electrical systems, and these are all simple abstractions of feedback. Feedback is a time-based function based upon input, output, and then how much of that circulatory stuff we're going to allow to occur. ICS and SCADA systems, every single one of them are time-based feedback systems. They are not absolute binary controls. That's why Holland survives, because they can gauge the water heights and the wind heights, and these are all analog functions that are continuously variable over time. Neuroscience, synaptic weighting. This means that we've got biasing. Biasing is that slight amount of adjustment, or maybe a macro adjustment, depending upon how many inputs you have into your matrix in order to make decisions. These are not binary. This is the way the brain works. We're going to AI, we're going to neural networks. None of them are absolute answers. They are all approximations that change with intensity on an analog basis over time. So in what we're doing, that's fundamentally the way things are structured right now. It's an either-or condition. We connected, we're not connected. We got bandwidth, we got speed, we have whatever the measurements we currently have are very, very static. So, let's go to war for a minute and look at what John Boyd did back in 1984. He published a paper called the OODA Loop, which said that in order to survive a dogfight, the only thing you have to do is get inside the time-based decision loop of your adversary, meaning you got to be faster. That's all it is. You got to be faster. Now, what this process is, whether I'm in war, market research, anything that occurs, pen testers, the minute you guys are finished doing a pen testing, your clients are secure, right? Yeah, you did laugh out loud, sir. You better keep that to yourself. There is no binary function. The pen tester knows that you have to keep this iterative cycle going all of the time in order to be able to have any sort of reliance upon your figures. And just because they're gone at 3 and they can check off the box for the board, wow, we passed this test. Yeah, well, so fucking what? So applying OODA loop, again, a dynamic analog function, is mission critical to the way we're thinking. Second thing that we do not use very much in our world is OOB, out of band. I know with Bank of America, I really like their out of band functions, and I try to do something on my mobile app, or I try to do it on the computer. Wait a minute, is that really Winn? Is that for you? Then they go out of band on some other control circuit. Now, this is where TCP/IP comes in. TCP/IP is the best of the world. It's also the worst of the world because one wire does it all. The information and data path is flowing along the same wire as the control signals are, which means when you get hosed, you're totally hosed. You get cut, you're totally cut. There is no alternative. And as Gene Spafford from Purdue points out so notably, the Internet was designed for survivability, not to survive a hostile attack. Entirely different approach. So out-of-band systems is something else from an architectural standpoint that we are not doing. We're trying to jam more and more and more shit down the same pipe. And what is that? Greater single point of failures built into all of our architectures. Now, let's look at how my wife's car works. And some of you may have some of the new collision avoidance systems. And basically what it does is it's warning you. It says, okay, there's a car here. You put on your blinkers, don't turn. Or it puts on your blinker and you don't get a message because there's not a car to your left or your right or speeding up behind you. How much do you trust your collision avoidance system? Or do you invoke an automatic feedback loop of turning your head still in order to view and get a secondary opinion? That's a feedback loop for confirmation. Out of band. Really simple example in life that we do automatically. Now with autonomous cars and all of this, I don't know how we're going to evolve in the future. We're just going to give over complete control to Skynet in our vehicles. I don't know. But this is the way that we should be doing things right now, and it's a very simple thing. Now, the key here in the feedback loop is time. How much time do we intuitively, does this analog little device here, expect us to confirm that there is really not a car there? How much time? Do we think about it, or is it intuitive? It's just something we do on our own. This is part of the approach that we need to take with network security to start getting some answers. So at this point, I'm going to hand this over to Mark because this is the key component of everything with analog network security, and it's called a time-based feedback flip-flop, and it's based upon Boolean logic from George Boole in the 1840s. Mark.
Okay, so who doesn't know a flip-flop? Okay, so you're all familiar with it. Okay, good. So the idea is you bring in that level of thinking, you bring in that manner of, not relying on just one particular line of information to be able to let you control in a similar way what you saw in the collision avoidance system. Okay, so we're going to take here, if you follow it here, where are we? Right, so we have an enable or we have a disable. Okay. We either let something through or we don't let something through. That's what we're trying to look at. Now, that's a binary output, but it comes from an analog way of thinking about the processing of that information. Okay? The core concept is to move away from absolutism, to move away from, this is absolutely how it works. This is, the only way in which we can assess something, towards having this feedback. And also, you noted in the machine learning, the neural network model, you also have feed-forward notions as well, where information can be passed around. What you want to do is you want to basically build a system that has awareness and move away from increasing your protection time and towards squeezing these OODA loops, okay? Decrease the detection time, decrease the reaction time, and then that'll let you sit inside your attacker's decision matrix. Their payoff will actually, the way they're measuring their payoffs will not be the same, because of what you're doing, inspired by this analog thinking. So Alice makes a choice, okay? But Bob has to approve it. And there's a delay being introduced, which means that you have to wait. You have to have a moment of hiatus just to say, right, am I going to get this approval? If it doesn't happen, then it doesn't go through. Okay? If it does happen, it goes through. And you can put in here more or less whatever you want. If you want it to be a TCP session being initiated, well, you know, you make it start and then it's going to carry on going because that's the way that TCP works. But what we're after is building in, I mean, we have it for other systems, you know, missile control. It takes 2 keys. You know, we have it as well in terms of trust that if you don't use your bank card, if you don't use your credit card for several months, what happens to your credit rating? Well, it falls off the face of the earth, doesn't it? Credit comes from creditas, Latin for trust. We already have this intuitive notion in other systems for how we deal with trust. So why aren't we doing it in network security? Why aren't we building it forward? Time is the important metric. You'll notice that in the equations before, we had this term T being involved, okay? That's not because, you know, we're putting time in and we're doing something weird and crazy. It's just to say that we are depending on time. That it is stateful from the point of view of time equals 0 and then iteratively down that loop. But is time really discrete here? Of course it is. Because computers work on clock cycles. They work on this ability to measure out time. So how do you bridge this link between this analog, smooth, continuous thinking and your discrete notions of clock cycles and bits and ones and zeros and bytes and whatever else? Well, what you do is you say, well, if we allow the function to, in the limit, become smooth, then you actually are fine. You don't actually lose anything at all. But what you gain is a way of thinking about trust which ties in to all the things that we're actually doing. So let's look at a door alarm. You open the door in the morning, right, and you have 30 seconds to get to that panel, okay? Now, if you don't get there in time, that delay kicks in, you didn't give it the second authorization, and then suddenly you have an alarm, and it goes off. We don't question this. We never question this. This is totally, totally obvious to us when we think about it in terms of physical alarms. Of course you've got to let 30 seconds. It takes him 25 seconds to even get from the door to the panel. And he's going to get the code wrong at least twice, you know, because he's, you know, he's still on code 2 previous. So the idea is that we don't question it here at all. Why do we question it when it comes down to network security? Why aren't we doing this kind of stuff absolutely all the way down? So what we're trying to build is abstract models, okay? When I say that I'm the math guy, I'm doing a PhD in the subject. It means actually I'm really bad at maths because I had to keep studying it. But the idea that we want is not to give an overall model. That's not the aim. The aim is to give ways of introducing the thoughts and the thought processes. Daniel Dennett, who's not read anything by Dan Dennett? Okay, a couple of people. Go and read some Daniel Dennett. It's great fun. There's a book called Intuition Pumps where he talks about not thought experiments, but things that will get your intuition going, things that will make you think in the right way. Here's, I think for you, these things generate about, what is it, petabytes of data?
It's terabytes of data. The average engine, this is either a GE or what you guys have an engine company over there. Oh, it's called Rolls-Royce.
Rolls-Royce, yeah. It's only small, you know.
There are over 5,000 detection points in the engine that are sampling every single second, which gets back to the concept of how our brain works, of I want to be able to remember so I can predict the future. That's why engine failures are so incredibly rare these days, because they're able to predict based upon so many analog points. The greater the granularity of detection and depth, the smoother the function becomes.
So once you have all this information, then suddenly, you know, they can predict when the engine's going to go right, when it's going to go wrong, and they can anticipate that fact. Okay? And there's that anticipation that we want to build in. Okay? So suppose you have a claim from a vendor that says, right, we can do a particular thing with this much accuracy or with this much reliability. Well, how do we actually measure that? How do we take into account all of the things that we want to when we introduce time? So we now have some known good traffic and some known bad sample, okay? And we should be able to go, right, good traffic, good traffic, good traffic, good traffic, good traffic, good traffic, virus, malware, whatever you want to call it, good traffic, good traffic, good traffic. How long does it take from the moment that goes to the device to the moment it says it's detected something? There's your detection time. It's a simple experiment you can do in a test bed. Okay? That is a metric. That is something you can use and should be using when you're doing all your risk assessments and when you're doing your architecture designs. Okay? Does that make sense?
Well,
okay?
Don't forget that this also gives us ability to have, introduce the concept of trust factor, which is the inverse of risk. Unless we tie security and risk and privacy into some sort of interchangeable set of discussions, the only common metric amongst them all right now is time. But when you introduce time into these and you look at this, and the math gets really pretty intense later on, is you end up with a trust factor that is the inverse of risk. So you can start evaluating trust inside of systems with actual hard, measurable numbers to call out vendors when they suck. We're anticipating, based upon just a simple model, to be able to do comparative vendor analysis that are in the black box world to see 3 orders of magnitude of differential in efficacy and performance between them. So we are hoping to really piss off a lot of people in the industry once this stuff hits the test bed. Sorry.
That's fine. But also note, I mentioned before that your trust decays when you have a financial system, for example. Your trust dies away if you don't use it, if you don't reevaluate or revalidate the trust that you had before. Your credit score goes down. Notice here, if you keep doing this, you don't do this just once, you keep doing it. The idea is it carries on going. Suddenly then, if a new attack comes in, you have a sample, say, or you have something new, you can put that in and see if it detects it, and you get a way of actually measuring the response time versus the actual response coverage as well. So you can relativize all of this very straightforward. Okay, so if you're not applying updates or the vendor isn't giving you updates in time enough, you'll be able to anticipate that in the model. That's the idea.
Any questions at this point? Because now it's going to start getting tough.
So when you're factoring in that known bad sample, right, does that imply that the vendor product will actually know? Like, there's so many different permutations of a bad sample. A lot of the products won't even detect a known bad.
Right.
So how does that factor in?
Well, we're treating as black boxes. I don't care what the hell it is. It could be IDS, IPS, firewall. It doesn't matter. It is anything that a vendor claims, we can solve this, we can detect this. I don't care what it is. So if you say you can detect it, that's going to go into our bad sample. Everything else is good sample. The only thing we're trying to do initially is not quantify the efficacy of what they're doing. We're caring about the time it takes to do it.
What if the time's forever?
If the time's forever, then go get another vendor.
Asterisk, never say never.
Yeah, exactly. Again, if you gave a really good point here that I want to focus on one second. Our greatest enemy in security is infinity. If we have no upper bounded limit, and no lower bounded limit of the performance that's expected from our systems in the time domain, that's why we're failing now. Because we're expecting 0 time and allowing infinity. As soon as we have those unbounded conditions, we fail, and that's where we've been since 1972 with the Anderson model. Continue.
There's a thing, catch me later, there's a linear programming model that I've made to explain quite how that kind of fits together. Question?
Isn't the time differential that you're actually concerned in the time difference between known good traffic and an unknown bad sample becoming known?
That's a different question.
Yes.
Okay.
Totally different question. This is just looking at one piece of bad sample. How long does it take black box to detect it? That's all we care about in this.
But that's still very binary thinking of pattern matching 1-0.
I don't care. No, that's your black box. I don't care. You can do it analog. You can do it digital. You're going to give me, this is a bad output. You're going to say this is bad.
Virus check.
Yeah. Virus check, IDS, malware check. It doesn't matter. I don't.
But the time becomes irrelevant.
No, the time is totally critical because it's going to take you somewhere between 0 and infinity to detect it. And it's going to be based upon your algorithms. It's going to be based upon how much memory, the performance of the hardware. There's a whole shitload of variables that go into these black boxes. And the vendors also use our appliance. Now use this appliance. Go to AWS. Each environment is going to change the time factor from the hardware performance alone. Over time, if the vendor is doing a good job, then the efficacy of the algorithms is naturally going to improve, and then that time should be squeezed. Yes?
So this seems like it's really only defending against DOS attacks.
Well, let us continue.
Okay.
Is it safe at this point to say that ultimately the human should have the final say?
That's going to be an arbitrary piece of the architecture which we will address. The human can be in the loop, does not have to be in the loop. Right? So the human is just another object in the time-based chain.
If it's ultimately a moving target and you have indefinite factors such as hardware specs saying time in and out, is it not just at its core and always dynamic target?
Absolutely, and unfortunately in this presentation we don't address doing polymorphic security networks, which is in the book that everybody's going to buy when it comes out in November. It's overpriced. But yes, been working on this a long time. But yes, that is absolutely a great question. It's the kind of thinking that we want to get going. We're not trying to claim we're absolutely right on everything, even though we kind of think we're getting close. But we want those kind of questions to come out. Where do you insert a human into a technical OODA loop?
So to come back onto that point again, this is actually the metric that you get out of that test is what you use in terms of your detection. Exactly. So, but the reason that so your question would come in terms of like a second dimension of time, in terms of the way in which, this is why I'm saying you don't just do it once, you keep on doing it. And then you can measure that time between, actually, it takes vendor X, 3 months to notice that this is a thing. And it takes vendor Y 2 months or something.
Or it takes Equifax 60 days to sell their stock.
Or infinity days to notice 30 web shells. So, it's to build models that will help us fix little points and to be able to get pieces of information that we can actually use,
This is actually talking about. This is a collective.
Yes.
Metric that we'll use.
Exactly. So imagine that we have 20 black boxes from 20 vendors, and then we're trying to get out physical, actual values, real values, which will let us then start building proper models and say, right, this works really well in conjunction with this and this, because here what you're doing, again, it's squeezing that OODA loop, it's getting those times right down. Stop thinking that it's to increase your protection time, which is the conventional way, fortress mentality, Whereas actually what you want to do is say, I'm going to detect and then react to something faster. So that's kind of this is one illustration. This is another one. So here you're going to see a few more mathematical symbols, but I wouldn't worry about them. They're any numbers. So what we have here is just what I was saying. You have your protection time greater than some detection time plus reaction time. But realistically, we want to look at the fact that we want to build a trust factor that's going to keep approaching 1. We want to keep pushing vendors and pushing ourselves in our own networks and also as a community to have this notion of our trust factors all approaching 1. We'll never get there, and we have to accept that. But we want to really push up and keep increasing the reliability and the efficacy of the things which we're using on our network.
CISOs and management got to get over the fact that secure is not a real state.
So some of the things that we want to build into this is a more Bayesian way of thinking. Okay, who's unfamiliar with Bayesian statistics? Okay, there'll be a very quick crash course then. It might actually be a car crash course, but I'll try. So why would you use a Bayesian model? Okay, if I have a disease which affects 1 in 1,000 people, and I have a test for this disease that is 99% effective, and I test positive for this disease on this test, what's the percentage likelihood that I actually have that disease? Who thinks it's like 50-50? Who thinks it's above 50? Who thinks it's well below 50? Good, that's the right answer. For those of you who are unclear, here's why. In the 1,000 people, you have 1 in 1,000 that actually has it, and you have 10 people that don't have it but will test positive. Okay? So if you test positive, you're now 1 in 11, 9%. This is why the medical profession invented the second opinion, or the second test. Because if you do the same test again and you get a second positive, then you feed in the previous test result and then you get 90% confidence.
That's why your girlfriends always pee twice to make sure that they're not pregnant. The 60s, We had sex in the 60s.
Thanks for that visual.
Yeah. That's not on a slide, I checked.
That's not the Jeopardy slide.
Yeah, that's a very...
Protection time, we're into that.
It depends on your background. Never mind.
Those companies have the numbers. It's still Bayesian.
It is. So if you...
So you guys are relying on Bayesian statistics. Why don't you use multiple models to build up your observation points? And the other question is, so going back to the previous example, you're talking
it scales up in a few slides.
Yeah, it does. Your first question also gets covered. If it doesn't, please remind us, and I'll fix it. But yeah, so this is the kind of way that we're thinking about the having the verification as also being built in. So you observe and keep observing. You never stop observing. That's why it's the OODA loop. And then when we finally find that vendor A is now detecting this thing, we can get a time measurement for the time it takes it. How many known bad samples of a particular thing does it take for it to notice, for example? And in what succession? Does it take 3 samples, or does it take 3 within 30 seconds? How do you relativize all these things? Okay? So there's lots more measurements that can be made across this whole system, but keeping it simple, because otherwise you get very, very messy diagrams that look like, I don't know,
some of the later ones.
Yeah, some of the later slides. So, this is kind of a more kind of completed kind of matrix flow diagram, whereby again we have the black box security mechanism to trigger out. So we now have a way of measuring our detection, and we're also going to look to measure the remediation is being complete. Okay, not necessarily a notification to the user, but looking at the way in which the remediations are now complete. Here is our DT and here is our RT, and now we have a complete picture of what the OODA loop looks like for this particular device.
And in the OODA loop, to answer your question, could be a human.
Yes.
Remediation, we're not saying that it's only technical remediation. There may be a human in that loop at one step. However, the thing to keep in mind is that as soon as you introduce the human into the loop, your time factor is going through the roof.
Yeah.
And by orders of magnitude, very, very quickly. So that has to be taken into account when you're trying to evaluate the trust of a particular process in whether it's network or at the coding level.
Yeah. So you can also look at this same kind of approach of measuring like phishing vendor products, okay? So a user clicks on something stupid that they really shouldn't click on, okay? Stupid user will do stupid user thing because, user might not have the right training or might just think, oh, I really like Pokemon, and then they download that app anyway. That too, each of their own, really, I still read the things on Pine, so, you're way ahead of me. So a user clicks on some stupid shit, and then you introduce a delay, and you look up the link and you do your thing. And you can actually say that there are vendors who are doing things that are a little bit like this, okay? But what we want to do is start building up a more formal model, a more accurate and justifiable model, which will start saying, right, you should be approaching it this way, and if your metrics on various points of measurement don't match up, then you're not doing it right. There's room for improvement. But it also gives you room for comparison. Vendor A can do this really fast. Vendor B hasn't got a clue.
So the introduction of the delay or negative time factor is adjusted based upon the measurement of the performance of the vendor. That can be adjusted over time.
Yeah.
At some point in the future, perhaps, if this model works, that could be part of the feedback loop using the neural processes that'll keep adjusting it based upon the varied inputs.
Yeah.
Again, that's going to be out in the future. We're trying to come up with a fundamental model here.
Yeah. And also keeping it as abstract and high level as we can so as not to lose ourselves in too many details for specific cases.
And so in this case, if your phishing vendor is at 99.9999, which would be roughly 6 sigma efficacy, then the amount of delay that is introduced into it is going to be absolutely, completely unnoticeable. Yet, with that delay, you're giving the vendor its opportunity to have a trust factor that's going to meet the 6 sigma standard. And doing the same, I think there's another slide coming up. You can do this not only in phishing, but you can do it in SMTP. You can do it in any human process at all that becomes non-noticeable to the human.
Here the example is that there's a delay line in terms of assessing that email before it's even seen by the user. So you have a lot of things you can actually do that we can build and start looking at these more intricate models with a kind of mathematical justifiability for saying, we're doing this because that means that we're going to do this. We're going to affect this detection time. We're going to squeeze that and get it down as narrow as possible. Okay? Do you want to talk about the ISP stuff?
All right. Now, DOS is one of the biggest problems out there. We know how to sort of kind of detect DOS-like stuff. Now, what we don't do is communicate. When an enterprise is DOSed, it has its clients sitting there, and the compliance is doing its damnedest to try to detect it and remediate it and all of those good things. However, we also know that that is not a universal fix, because without the help of upstream carriers, you're leaving the enterprise all on its own to fix a problem that is actually, especially in the DDoS world, one that is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 involved, and you have to get them involved. So in this case, all we're saying is that we're going to have some sort of detection reaction process that's going to occur at the enterprise endpoint. When something is detected, and only at that point, communicate upstream one hop to your primary carrier, where you're getting the traffic from. We know where the traffic's coming from. It's coming from him. Tell him, ISP, you're an ISP first hop, I am seeing X traffic. Can you help me filter it out? Well, ISPs are real good at filtering stuff really fast. So, stop it, filter it. Now let's continue on. And what we do is we introduce a delay line. And that delay line, or negative time, is introduced based upon the efficacy and the speed at which the detection and reaction and mitigation occur between the enterprise and that first hop. What does that mean? It means that the traffic then is momentarily halted until a remediation is occurring one hop up. If we introduce the flip-flop in the feedback loop, then we've got a second level of confirmation of the activity that occurs to verify within the bounded, not perfect, but the bounded limits of the trust factor, somewhere between 0 and infinity. And obviously we're trying to approach 1 with trust factor and keep it as high as possible. So this process is still on premises with just talking one hop up. If we start doing it with multiple levels and tiers, now keep in mind that the way ISPs work is they don't talk many to many from like 1 million to 1 million. They're like 6 or 8 or 10 to talk to each other. Tier 1s, then they'll do the tier 2s. And there's limited paths of conversation here. But when you're in a DOS attack of any sort, your primary communication channel is gone. So what do? You have to go out of band. And this goes back to the out of band concept with a detection and reaction matrix with a protocol that we have some outlines for that are, we're not even talking high speed here. It could be done cellular. I mean, carriers got plenty of ways of moving data around that's out of band. And all this is saying is, I'm taking all the data that I'm collecting from the enterprise, and then I'm going to take the data that I'm collecting from, in this case, the first hop, and it goes into the systems detection reaction matrix, which increases efficacy, increases the database. It's more stuff for us to look at, but it also allows a complete out-of-band reaction mechanism by which the enterprise and all of the various hops along can then talk to each other. When you do this, what happens? Suddenly, if every single ISP in the world did this, and they had this massive detection reaction matrix, which is not high bandwidth at all, very, very low bandwidth, suddenly we'll know where the DOS is coming from. We'll know where the spam is coming from. We'll be able to understand how to stop it at the source. We will find 50 million grandmothers that are infected and be able to tell them your machine is part of a botnet. Because we will be able to then understand exactly how the traffic is propagating across the entire global network with a very simple out-of-band matrix that's based upon all of the math that Mark was talking about. So I'm going to go back to let you have it. But that takes the concept, because it will work on spam and DDoS, because they're effectively, in my mind, the same thing.
Yeah. So when we're talking about security measurements and when we're trying to enumerate the ways in which we can rethink things, we look to these good examples. This is that same diagram from earlier. What we're trying to get is you have this, the analog feedback loop creating this time-based flip-flop. If you think about the way in which you have this out-of-band communication, you're able to build in these delays. Notice that if you have this delay at every particular point, when things are being detected, then you should be able to find a way of blocking stuff. So static security is a fail, and we know this is going to be very true already. We're seeing machine learning models being brought into security because they have this dynamism. They also have some pitfalls as well, things like the semantic gap and that sort of stuff, which we don't cover here at all. But what we're trying to do is push forward and say this is good. We need to bring out these particular details. Without feedback, we have network chaos. Infinity is this real enemy, and if we look at this min-max approach, this abandonment of absolutes, then what we're able to do is to squeeze this loop, get loopy, and then at the same time only mean something on a quantum level node. Okay? It's meaningless. You can't ever really truly be in sync. What we're trying to do is get things to happen with a delay, build in these other analog notions, and then what we're able to do is start looking at a new way of hopefully fixing a few things.
I'm going to comment on this, and the reason we bring in the quantum issue here is, again, I'm going to pick on vendors. And how many of the vendor sales guy go, oh, it happens in real time. It happens instantaneously. Bullshit! There is no such thing, unless you've got entanglement sorted out. So come on. And it's a lot, and I'm picking on vendors because they have been part of the problem, but they also are potentially one of the greatest avenues for solution to be able to start taking these concepts and actually building them into an integrated whole. But the concept of instantaneity is something we need to get over and quit using and trying to convince people that there is such a thing as real time in networks.
So, what can we do? How can we do this? What are the things that we can manage today, tomorrow? How can we actually get out this information, start building these things in the real world? Well, we can measure this detection and this reaction very easily. You could do it tomorrow, you know? You can measure the vendor performance, and you can do a comparative analysis, relatively straightforward. The test bed is hopefully going to be a way of just showing a method of doing this and building the protocols and the reliable test databases and all the stuff that you need to be able to get that to work, and how to update it and how to get new samples and all this other stuff.
Well, I do want to say, we're not building products.
No.
We're giving all this away. We want vendors, we want to help vendors and the community do this. We are not going to start building products, but we are working on getting some test beds and a couple of labs going over in Europe that have shown some interest. But we're not trying to pitch a product at all. Just wanted to put that one up.
Yeah.
Just the book.
Sorry?
Just the book.
That's 100 copies for you. But I'll give you 5% off. No problem.
Yeah. So, what we want to do is we want to be able to create, in a way, the demand for this information, which will be hard and fast ways that you can actually measure stuff, and then use that information when you're building solutions in a company or building solutions even as a vendor. Okay, if you know that you're going to be, not to gamify the thing, but to have solid metrics which are actually going to be of good use and of meaningful content to people who are building networks and who ultimately are protecting users. So you examine security process for intrinsic feedback. How else can this feedback be implied? How can we take this from the very few examples we've shown here, and how can we build that forward? Where else can we do this? How else can we do this? What else can be done to encourage this in ways that maybe it hasn't been done before, now that we are trying to build some very mathematically justifiable and stable models to say, right, here's a good way of thinking about this. What can we do now? What's next? Okay? And that, I think...
That is a high-level pitch on where analog network security is going. The concepts at this point, I think Mark mentioned SMTP. By putting in negative time into SMTP, suddenly that email that went out with all the private data to 50 of your competitors with the appropriate policy and delay time and feedback loop, we would expect, with not too stupid people, but if you introduce that feedback loop in there with proper detection mechanisms, to decrease that kind of SMTP problems that are so prevalent, especially with data extrication. Whether it's data extrication over SMTP or any other path, Again, that gets back to the concept of detection black box. Do you have a confidential data exfiltration filter on your network? Well, if you do, tie it into this model, and we can start then figuring out the time, amount of delay that is required in order to not detect it after it's already left the facility, which is the way that we're treating shit now. We'll detect it, but oh shit, it just happened. Well, we detected it within 4 minutes. That's not bad. No, maybe you should have had a 4-minute delay prior to the event actually going. If you know that the efficacy of your time-based detection product is 4 minutes, build in a damn delay. This is not rocket science, but we're still trying to go back on absolutism. The root problem of the Bob and Alice issue, whether we're talking code, identification, administration, the root problem of having 6 administrators, which is the average number of administrators you have to have for a particular mission-critical box in order to cover it 24/7, and you add in your trust factors of each of those individuals, the math of it's all Bayesian stuff comes down that suddenly your trust factor has gone down by a factor from 460%, I think the number is. It's something insane because we do not have any external validation or feedback process. All of the administrators are given equal opportunity to fail with each other. And the Bayesian math proves how weak our multiple administration system is, which is why then introducing the feedback loop and the time base, you can use it either as both are required to do it prior to the action, or the secondary authentication must occur within a specific amount of time. And then you can then measure the amount of exposure time that you've got. Once you understand your exposure time, you can translate that into data risk because data exfiltration is another function of time. So everything relates back to time. So this is now time for you to beat the shit out of us, and please ask the hard questions, what you like and what you don't like.
So,
I saw you first.
To address the nature of this feedback loop and the necessary delay for it to occur for non-real-time, or I'm sorry, closer to real-time and user expected real-time communication. Just as you were used to a logical delay, filters, there's all sorts of great technology that go step something about, but maybe not a full implementation.
There's an awful lot of stuff that exists. This is an architectural model. The math is not actually all that difficult, but it's looking at it from the standpoint of time as the primary metric, so I can have data that will translate into all the different disciplines and be able to introduce the delays in order to compensate for the performance that we can now should be able to measure. So it's basically a compensating control, and that's a CISSP question, isn't it?
It's also relativizing it as well. So we mentioned, it's also relativizing it. So we also mentioned there was an exfiltration time. And if you assume your attacker has perfect knowledge, inside jobs are a thing, take all the data, the IP, the user data, everything you've got, and just blob it together as the database. Take the size of that, and take the bandwidth out the door, and then divide the two together. You get a time. You get a time that you can actually work with in terms of trying to relativize all of these detection reaction times.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That could occur even on a per endpoint basis, as long as there's some sort of aggregate or cumulative measurement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
In terms of actually building the system architecture, what actually is needed?
This is an 8-hour talk that we focused a couple little bits on. There are coding examples, there's human examples in the book, there's a network, there is all the security. So we've got lots of different examples of how to do it with all the network diagrams and the supporting map behind it. Not right now, no, absolutely. We're not trying to productize it. I'm assuming vendors will jump on the bandwagon and smart people will start finding ways to use it and improve upon the model is the concept here. There's nothing like this yet, and we're hoping that it's on the right path.
One of the big things will be a protocol definition.
how do you address, like, so from a vendor perspective, right, sometimes a vendor will have an endpoint solution with a SIM, and then like a network solution. So how does your model of testing connect together? Those systems actually talk to each other. Because if it's a black box, and you deploy multiple systems, your attack will actually get lower.
Maybe. We don't know that.
Right. But the thing is, how do you, like, if you're intended implementation of your like, comparison algorithm, right? It's like, you know, before
We're looking at a decision point. Where is the decision point? You've got an input to your system that says, look, where is the decision point? At a certain point after multiple vendor integration, where is the final queue, the queue output of the logic?
The thing is, like, in order to do that, you have to, like, that's the, like, is like, first, like, you've got to right, then, like, so the idea is, it doesn't matter what presentation the vendor product is.
All we're doing is measuring time.
That's
Time. That's the only thing we can the efficacy of it we can measure. Because we know what known good, we know what known bad is, we know where we should be approximately. I think there's another session coming in. So we